Let's talk about American involvement first of all. Antony Blinken is on his way now. What's the purpose specifically of that visit? Will he meet Netanyahu?
I don't know what his exact schedule will be when he gets on the ground. Certainly, he is going to be conveying to Israeli officials the same message that President Biden conveyed yesterday in his speech. So a private conveyance from the Secretary of State to his counterparts in Israel that we stand solidly behind them, that support will continue to come. You probably saw that today the first tranche of military assistance arrived. So the Secretary will be making it clear that additional tranches will come, that we will be consulting with members of Congress on additional funding requests going forward, and that they can count on our support.
And what does this military assistance look like? Because we've seen the aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, and its group of vessels. That is about deterrence, about not spreading this further, but you're also providing the Israelis with weapons.
Absolutely, yes. They are obviously expending significant rates of interceptor missiles for Iron Dome, artillery rounds, small arms ammunition, and other types of needs that they might have, of course, in trying to be very precise in how they go after Hamas targets. So we want to make sure that to the maximum extent we can, we're providing them the tools and weapons they need.
Now, just briefly, the hostages. I mean, that is an acute problem for the president. It must be very high on his mind.
It's a problem, absolutely, for the president. It's a problem for leaders around the world because we have every reason to suspect that other nations are represented in that hostage pool. No more important priority to President Biden than the safety and security of Americans overseas. So we're going to work very, very closely with our Israeli counterparts and to make sure that they have what they need, that we're supporting efforts, and that we are also taking seriously our responsibility to get Americans home back to their families.
You talk about Hamas targets in Gaza. We have all seen the pictures that have emerged. They're familiar for anyone who has watched that crisis over the years. What are your thoughts as you see what is unfolding in Gaza?
Well, look, nobody wants to see any innocent life taken. And my goodness, we're up over 1,000 now, something like 1,200 innocent Israeli lives cut short, murdered, butchered, and slaughtered. Nobody wants to see that happen. The Israelis have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to go after these Hamas terrorists. Terrorists, I might add, are putting Palestinians at greater risk by hiding in command centers and hospitals and residential buildings and schoolhouses. So they're certainly no friend to the Palestinian people.
No, and I've seen that. I've seen that on the ground. I've seen how Hamas does that in Gaza.
Absolutely.
But the Israelis have made quite clear, the defense minister has made quite clear, this is different. It appears to be an eye for an eye here, and that the attack that Israel is now doing in Gaza is something fundamentally different from what we've seen before. Is the president comfortable with that? Because I thought his words were interesting, where he appeared yesterday to tell the world that he'd reminded Netanyahu that there are laws in war.
Look, that's what makes the relationship between us and Israel so strong. We believe in shared values, shared interests, like the rule of law, like the law of war, like respect for innocent life, which is something that Hamas does not observe. So that's what makes this relationship strong. That's what makes our partnership so viable going forward. And we recognize that Israel is up against it right now, and they are taking aggressive action. They have seen a slaughter on a scale that they haven't seen since before 1973, and we have to recognize that as well.
And does that extraordinary weekend, the slaughter that we've seen in the kibbutzes, in Ashkelon, in other cities, unparalleled in the history of the state of Israel? Certainly, they have never seen this. Does that give Israel the right to do something a little bit different in Gaza this time?
This is for Israel to speak to. It's not for the American government to issue rights to Israel. Israel is going to defend themselves. They certainly have our support. I don't think the president made that perfectly clear yesterday. They have our support as they continue to try to defend themselves.
And is there a line? Is there a line?
I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals or speculate about what the future is going to look like.
Well, let's talk about
the Israeli people have our support.
Okay, let's talk about what's happening now then. Food supplies cut off, water supplies cut off, electricity cut off. Medics in Gaza saying they are now having to choose only the most critically ill or critically injured to try and save.
I will just say that we understand, and there has long been a humanitarian situation there in Gaza, and the United States continues to believe that humanitarian assistance should still get to the people of the Palestinians that live in Gaza. They're not to blame here. It's not their fault. They didn't invite Hamas in to do this, and they, as I said earlier, they are falling victim to what Hamas has done, how Hamas has been using them basically as shelters.
Can I talk just a bit briefly, more broadly, about America's Middle East policy? Isn't the truth that America dropped the ball here, averted its eye, hoped that the Middle East would not, as it always does, come to the top of a president's table?
Couldn't disagree more with you, Mark, on that. Couldn't disagree with you more.
But you've been focused on Afghanistan. You've been focused, understandably, on Ukraine. There has been a desire, this administration, the Obama administration to an extent, to just try and disengage with the Middle East. Let them work it out. Hope that Saudi-Israeli deal works.
No, I'm sorry. I just don't agree with that at all. I mean, thanks to the United States leadership, President Biden's leadership, we were able to help broker a truce in Yemen that's now, going on almost 18 months. How many lives has that saved in Yemen? President's trip last summer, summer before last, to the Middle East, where we were able to really see steps to take to better integrate Israel into the region, steps towards normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I recognize it's not there yet. Take a look at the number of attacks on our troops in Iraq and Syria. Oh, by the way, we still have troops in Iraq and Syria going after ISIS. That hasn't been diminished. The attacks by Shia militia groups have decreased significantly because of the way we have responded very muscularly against Iran-backed militia attacks on us. So the idea that we've pulled back from the Middle East, we've increased our military presence in the Gulf in just the last few weeks, and now we have additional naval forces in the Eastern Med off of Israel. So I just absolutely have to take issue with the idea that we have somehow turned our back on the Middle East.
Okay, fair enough. But in that answer, you didn't mention one thing. You didn't mention the Israel-Palestine conflict, the heart of the problem, essentially. You didn't mention that.
You are right. I did not, and I should have, because we have been continuing to want to pursue a two-state solution. Diplomatically, we have been engaged with all sides to try to see if there's a path forward to a two-state solution, which the president has spoken many times he still believes is the right promise, is the right vision for the region. We have absolutely been engaged. Now, obviously, that effort is probably not the prime focus of anybody right now as Israel tries to defend itself against these attacks.
Lastly, what now? I mean, how does the U.S. administration, how does your boss, President Biden, mold this crisis, which appears to be spiraling?
The first most important thing we got to do is keep that support going to Israel right now so that they can continue to defend themselves. That's the prime thing. You heard the president talk about that. The other thing we got to do is, and you've already asked me about this, is the hostage issue. We know we have some number of Americans that are in that pool. We have no higher priority than to get them home, and so we're going to be working with the Israelis about what that looks like, what support they might need. And I don't know the answers to those questions right now, and it's going to be particularly tricky because they're not sitting in a prison somewhere where you can just do a negotiation. They're in an active war zone, and it's going to be obviously a lot more difficult. And then the third thing, and this is not at all the least of them, and you heard the president talk about this yesterday, is to make sure we're looking after the Jewish community here in the United States. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world. Certainly, we're seeing it here in the United States. We need to make sure that the Jewish community here knows that they can worship, they can work, they can play with their friends, they can recreate in safety, and we're going to be watching that very, very closely.
And I just want to ask you once more your concern about how this spirals, because we have seen what's happening on the northern border with Hezbollah.
That's why that carrier strike group is there, Mark. We want to make sure that we send a strong signal to anybody, whether it's a terrorist group or a nation state. They're trying.
Nation state being Iran.
Any nation state that might want to be taking advantage of this or has hostility towards Israel, you need to rethink those plans. We will look after our national security interests. That's why that carrier strike group is there.